Are you looking out at your garden right now in the depths of winter and feeling like it's not really a garden? Or maybe you're really interested in adding some more winter color, but you just don't really know where to begin, and those really structured boxwood formal hedges don't really match the vibe of your garden? Well, then you came to the right place, because today I want to share with you how to create a beautiful winter garden that can emerge as your summer and seasonal gardens and flowers start to fizzle. Winter is often seen as this kind of quiet, empty time in the garden, but there are so many incredible plants that really come to life at this time of year. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I want to share all of the things that I've learned from growing things in a very, very cold climate. Our cottage garden is in Vermont in a zone 5A. Sometimes we get below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. We're up on a mountain, and it can snow all the way into June. So it's a long, long period of winter. And I love cottage gardens. So while I do love formal structure and things like that, the gardening that I've chosen to do around our cottage is cottage gardening. And so I love to have a wildness and sort of a freedom of the plants in the garden space. And structured boxwood hedging or holly hedging, ilex, privet even, it doesn't really fit the way that I want to garden. However, there are ways that you can add tons of winter interest to extend that period and almost make it sort of this beautiful reveal at the end of the gardening season. You can do this with things like berries, colored twigs, interesting bark, evergreen interest. You can do this with things that flower in the winter time and have beautiful scent. Plus, it's really nice to have places for the wildlife to go, to sort of scurry off to and maybe hibernate during the winter. And having them tucked away all cozy in your garden, it's really, really a lovely thing. So if you're in colder climates, you probably don't want to be planting at this time of year, but this is just to get you dreaming, to get you thinking about what your garden could look like next year if you do that planning right now. So before we get into the plants, I want to just encourage you to look outside at your garden and see the areas that you feel kind of least inspired by, the areas where there's the least amount of maybe structure or interest. Where are you sort of not drawn to? Where is there infrastructure that isn't very pleasant to look at? Those are the areas you might want to focus on now, because if you can invite areas in your garden that feel really inspiring at this time of year, even if it's just 2 or 3 spaces that have that very intentional winter interest, it'll make the world of difference as the days are just dark and cold and you're just craving some kind of beauty and life. So you can think about structure in terms of statuary. You can think of, beautiful statues that work well in your garden. You could think of it in the form of arbors or benches. Benches are great as well because they're a wonderful way to kind of cap a perspective. If you're looking down a path and there's a bench, that's a beautiful way. It kind of draws you down because you want to sit at the bench. And then from the other perspective, as you're sitting out, you can orchestrate a really beautiful view, maybe of your house or of another part of the garden from that viewing point. You're really able to control the eye of the viewer or your own eye as you sit and enjoy and reflect. You could also add a fountain, but in terms of fountains and statuary, if you live in an area that gets really, really cold like we do, then I would suggest maybe trying to lean on the side of things that can stay out in the winter time. Things like, some metal statuary can be really beautiful. You could do things like add natural elements, a pond, or even things like boulders or rocks. We have tons of giant boulders on our property. Like I said, we live on the side of a mountain and we've been blessed with very rocky soil, but the benefit of that is that we can use those rocks throughout the garden. We use them to edge our borders, and we use them to create patios and paths. The cobblestone path up to the front of our cottage we made that from the rocks on our property. Also, the boulders, my husband likes to carry them from around the property and bring them over because they're covered in moss. They're really gorgeous. And having that interest It's not something you need to cover or bring in because these rocks are from here. They're perfectly safe to leave out. So that can be a way of doing it. Sometimes with the larger borders on the property covered in moss, that's where I like to leave bird seed and things like that. So the chipmunks, the squirrels, and the birds can come and feast in the coldest months. But if it does get really cold and you don't want to winterize these things, think about things that can stay outside that you don't have to mess around with. Like I said, you could do benches and arbors. Those are a great way of adding structure to an area, particularly if you have some evergreens growing up them. Maybe you have some ivy growing up an arbor, and the blueberries are a beautiful way of having some winter interest, as well as those glossy, larger leaves. And like I said, if you're not a huge fan of those hedging plants, but you do want areas where the birds and the wildlife can kind of hang out, you could do some lavender or rosemary that'll provide that glaucous blue-green kind of interest in the middle of winter. And the benefit of rosemary is that it blooms early. So sometimes it blooms in the middle of winter. For us in California, when we lived there, we had a giant rosemary that I had kind of trained into this tree shape. It was beautiful. And it bloomed in February. Beautiful, crystal clear blue that the bumblebees just loved. It was alive with bumblebees in February. And then just in terms of evergreen interest, I want to add a few more in there for you. They're kind of a little bit more unexpected. You know, you have your boxwoods, your yews, your spruces, you know, all of your conifers that are going to stay green throughout the winter time. But there are some perennials that are unexpectedly beautiful at this time of year. The spessart geranium, it is gorgeous. It has some of the red, you know, touches of the autumn color and lots of green. And if we have a relatively milder winter, you know, if it doesn't get too far into the -20s, then it will stay green and red, and it just looks so festive and beautiful. Also, the ajuga, the name of the ajuga is blanking right now, but it's in our cottage garden, and it's got purple foliage, and it is just beautiful. It's got these spires of gorgeous purple blooms that bloom more in the springtime, but that stays purple. It's an ever purple. It stays purple throughout the winter, and it's really gorgeous. Another one is the tiarella. Tiarella really holds its shape and color throughout the winter. So those are a few that you could add into your garden, and just be mindful, see what's staying. Some years are lamium, beautiful ground cover, silvery and green, that'll stay evergreen and ever silver throughout the winter. So those are just some ideas if you're not a huge fan of boxwood. And for your wildlife, you could also think about things that you can leave up. Much like the hardy geranium, the spessart, which has, you know, remnants from autumn, you could leave things up like your hydrangea seed heads. That provides really beautiful texture and structure in the garden. You could leave up things like echinacea. The birds love the echinacea. You could leave things up like sedums and yarrow. Those are fantastic for staying up to even heavy snow loads. And there are just so many seed heads that look really beautiful and add gorgeous structure. As long as you're keeping them clean, you know, going through if a few of their branches break, just tidy that up. But looking at it and just seeing that beautiful interest throughout the winter, any kind of structure, and some of these like, you know, Jupiter's beard or things like that, or grasses, are just fantastic. So just be mindful of that. See what works well in your area. If you get a lot of rain, that might not be as possible for you. If you get deluges of rain or lots of snowstorms, then it might not be feasible to leave everything up. But you could always leave things up and then just go through and clear them out. It's a nice way to get outside and do a little bit of gardening in the dead of winter. My favorite backdrop shrub, perhaps my favorite shrub for foliage of all time, is ivory halo dogwood. But red and yellow twig dogwoods are so fantastic for winter interest. Red twig dogwoods, they just look so gorgeous surrounded by snow, especially if you have a few other little evergreens or bits of winter interest around them, like grasses and things like that. Oh my gosh, they are just stunning. They are stunning throughout the entire year. So ivory halo is my favorite of the colorful twigged dogwoods, but also yellow twig dogwood. We added yellow twig dogwood on our hill, maybe the second year we were at the property, and surrounded it by different colored evergreens and a few winter flowering perennials that I'll talk about in a minute. But oh my goodness, we also have tons of bulbs on the hill as well, which we'll cover later, but it is just such a nice view. And because we see that as we leave the house, it's so nice to fill an area like that, whether it's out of your favorite window that you look out a lot, or whether it's out of your front door, or you're coming and going, giving it that kind of amplification of all of the things that you love about winter plants. It just makes you feel like you still have a garden when everything else is dormant. So yellow twig dogwoods, particularly when paired with something blue, something like a blue spruce. I absolutely love this look. You could do it with a blue spruce that stays a little bit shorter. You could do it with a blue spruce ball. You could do it with some kind of juniper. Having those two colors next to each other is gorgeous. Also pairing a yellow twig dogwood with something like a calicarpa, a beauty berry, with its royal, regal purple berries all throughout the shrub would be a wonderful pairing. And I think if you had the ability to put all three of those together, that would look really, really striking. I think that yellow twig dogwoods on their own, you don't necessarily have to plant them en masse. Having them on their own next to a blue spruce, next to maybe a little, smaller kind of cone or spherical shape, whether that's an arb or a boxwood or something, not hedging, but something spherical, having that maybe with the grass behind, some hydrangea behind that, a little bit of heather in front. Oh my gosh, beautyberry, that would just be such a gorgeous look to it. Now, red twig dogwoods, I think, look fantastic en masse. I think they are just absolutely gorgeous. And I think they have this because they're such a rich, vibrant color, they really provide that yearning, that kind of craving for color in the dead of winter. They're also fantastic because you can cut them back, even cutting a third of them all the way down, a third of the branches, and then using those to decorate for Christmas. They're wonderful for festive decorations as well. Next up is Hellebores or Lenten roses or Christmas roses. These are just exquisite. Not only do they look beautiful at this time of year, but those flowers, they look a little bit dusty and kind of antique throughout the season, but they will stay in bloom, throughout the season because the sepals stay intact. So they look like they're blooming throughout the entire year. They are gorgeous. They spread pretty easily, but they're not a pain in the neck to kind of wrangle out of your garden. They are just stunning. And the way they look, they're just captivating. They look very magical. So if you have a cottage style garden, consider adding some hellebores. I love beautiful, rich, kind of ruby or deep fuchsia colored flowers like the Anna's hellebore, I think, my namesake. Or there's just tons that you can play around with. The little freckled petals, they are just so unique and beautiful. And it's really exciting to have those throughout the garden. Also, those large leaves are evergreen in most gardens. And even if you want to clear them up and tidy them up, the stems as they emerge just look so beautiful and cheerful as we draw more and more into the new year. But in some places you can have hellebores that will bloom at Christmas. You could have hellebores. For us, our hellebores really start to bloom in April. And they're usually covered with lots of snow, but they will continue to bloom. And you can get varieties that'll bloom earlier and later. So just experiment and let me know if you already have some hellebores in your garden. They're absolutely one of my favorites. Now, a few different annuals that you can add are things like violas and pansies. In some areas, these can stay evergreen and ever blooming throughout the entire winter season, which is so fun to see those cheerful faces smiling up at you. You can have colors that will match maybe your holiday decorations and move all the way into the heart of winter, and as spring starts to emerge, they'll just fit along with all of your bulbs. I think particularly some of the color pairings that I really love when it comes to violas and pansies and things like that are purples and blues, because when they're really at their peak for us in April, but in some gardens it's February, March, it's wonderful to have those sitting side by side with our Chianodoxa, which is this really piercing sapphire blue, along with all of our daffodils, the beautiful daffodils that come out. I really love topsy-turvy, and I love kind of split corona daffodils, but also those large, just trumpets smiling out at that time of year. It's just so nice. So having those pansies and violas all around can really help to provide a beautiful color palette as you're looking out. I like to call it the Swedish flag because my family's Swedish, but the Ukrainian flag of all of the colors. It's so gorgeous. It just looks like sunshine on a crystal clear blue sky. But in some areas, you can also have things like snapdragons that'll bloom throughout the winter. So that could be a wonderful one to add as well, especially if you want lots of rich color. And next we have heather or angelica, beautiful mountain purples that are just wonderful for kind of scurrying along rocks. Their thyme-like foliage, those little tiny needles with the beautiful bell-shaped flowers that come in ivories, pinks, and purples are just really gorgeous. And I think especially if you plant them in large swathes, and if you have them paired with things like yellow-twig dogwoods, with hydrangeas, with maybe some beautiful evergreen structures in your garden, that could look so gorgeous. And we've grown them in containers as well, which is fantastic. They're just a great sort of rambling ground cover that provides a beautiful amount of interest, especially when planted en masse, that can be really painterly and striking. And another one for our bird friends is all of the berries that you can grow and kind of foster in your garden, even crab apples and things like that. We have a couple of prairie fire crab apples, and we're training them into sort of lollipop topiaries at the front of our cottage garden. And the flowers are insane. It's beautiful. I love the structure of it. Even with, things that aren't evergreen, just providing that structure within a plant, whether you're topiarizing it, maybe you're pleaching something, you have some espaliered pears or something like that. It can just be such a gorgeous way of providing that interest just with the framework of the actual plant. Now we mentioned calicarpa or beautyberry, and we also talked about ivy a little bit, but there are so many beautiful berries that you can have this time of year. Things like holly. It's a very common one, but for good reason. Reliable, sturdy, glossy, pokey leaves, beautiful berries. Also, viburnum can provide some really interesting color and texture in the garden at this time of year. And when you're thinking about interest in your garden, wildlife is interest. That is interesting to look at. So providing places for the wildlife to kind of snuggle away. We talked about this back in autumn, or things that they can feast on in the colder months without you having to go and buy bird seed, which I also love to do. But having a little bit of both is really supportive for them. And then you can just sit and really observe these beautiful, particularly the birds this time of year. We have some weasels and some things that come out at this time of year, but probably my favorites are the chickadees that come out this time of year. Just absolutely gorgeous. I love them so much. Traveling all throughout France last year, we were able to visit lots of gardens and see them in the depths of winter. And oh my goodness, their use of certain plants that I wouldn't think of in terms of providing structure. They used holly for a lot of their topiaries, and it pruned up and topiarized really effectively. So that's one that I would consider maybe adding a little bit of structure. So let's say you have a cottage garden. One thing I love to do is to add shapes and things like that kind of blend in, but that as everything else falls away, they keep their structure. So things like spears, boxwood balls, or arborvitae balls are fantastic for this. Things like pyramids. We had like a conical shaped boxwood in one of our other borders. We had a blue spruce ball. You could do lots of different firs and junipers that can be topiarized into little lollipops that are so beautiful. But just think about that, how you could have these evergreen structures that kind of fit with the general shape of your garden. And so they just sort of look like they play beautifully with everything around them. And then when everything disappears, those structures stay in place. That's one way that you can do it without feeling like you have formal garden space. And then as everything is fading away, those really provide interest and structure. So maybe give holly a try if you're able to grow it in your area. And you just want to make sure that you either have a variety that is self-pollinated and it's going to provide those berries, or make sure that you have a male and a female shrub so that you ensure that there's cross-pollination, and then you'll have those berries. Next up, we have early bulbs. Now, this can be in the form of snowdrops, which, as the name suggests, I mean, they look like little droplets of snow, but on top of that, they emerge from the snow. For us, they're usually tamped down by a lot of snow, but in the area where they are, there are a few trees hanging over, a few beech trees, and we've added some other winter interests there in the form of a couple of smaller evergreens. And so in that area, we've really been able to kind of clear off the space so that those snowdrops can spread and really cover that area. But oh my gosh, snowdrops planted en masse is just spectacular. There are so many gardens that I want to visit that just have that, because we're slowly building it in. And any gardens that we have in the future, we are going to add so many snowdrops if we're able, because they are just magical. The scent, the look of them, they're just such special plants. And they have little secrets inside. As you open them up, you know, there's these like little downturned bells, and as you open them, each of them look different, and they have green patterns on the petals, just so beautiful. But other bulbs are things like aconites and anemones and crocuses. Anemones, particularly the earlier blooming varieties, or things like iris reticulata. Oh my gosh, if you don't have iris reticulata in your garden, I really cannot recommend it enough. It is so, so beautiful, and in certain areas it can bloom as early as January. So really try to add that in, because they are just stunning, and they have a really vibrant color. You know, while snowdrops are amazing and dainty and magical, they are white. So if you get a lot of snow and you're sort of used to seeing the cloudy skies and the snow on the ground, and everything just feels a little bit whitewashed, it's incredible to have bursts of really fantastic, rich jewel tone colors. And the iris reticulata is perfect for that. Deep blue, you can get it in a deep, rich purple as well, but fantastic. And Chionodoxa, I forgot to mention that as well, Glory of the Snow. That's another beautiful one. Very happy, cheerful, with their open faces and their ability to spread really wonderfully. That's another fantastic one, Glory of the Snow. And now let's talk about shrubs that you can add in for some flower power that will bloom in the winter time. Daphne is one of those. I'm sure you're familiar with things like, you know, camellias that bloom either in the early spring or even in the winter time. But a lot of these winter blooming shrubs will provide scent. Daphne is one of those. Gorgeous scent. Early blooming magnolias, like for us, the star magnolia blooms really early. Things like forsythia and quince can bloom in the late winter, early spring. And if you live in an even warmer climate, things like mimosa will bloom in January and February. Gorgeous, sort of ruffly, feathery, like plumes of yellow on these dainty branches with their pinnate foliage. So gorgeous and really, really cheerful to brighten up and kind of energize your winter borders. But Mahonia and wintersweet also brighten up those gloomy days. Witch hazel is another one. You can get witch hazel that blooms at different times of year, but it has this really interesting structure to the petals, and, you know, kind of juxtaposed to the silvery foliage, it can look really gorgeous. They almost look like little handmade ornaments. They're so delicate, and they sort of look like crunched strips of paper. But they're very, very interesting, and they could provide some really fun interest if you did maybe a witch hazel that has for us, the witch hazel that bloomed for us early. I don't remember the variety because it was unnamed when we bought it at a plant fair, but it blooms kind of reddish orange flowers. And so to pair something like that, maybe having some blue interest behind it, like blue juniper, blue spruce, something like that, maybe some kind of fir that has a glaucous look to it. And then underneath it, maybe a purple heather with some purple iris reticulata, something like that could just be gorgeous, or some crocuses coming up from there would just be such a fantastic pairing. Maybe some of the hellebores, maybe a purple or a black variety of hellebore to make it just look so amazing. That witch hazel with like a black hellebore at the bottom could be a really whimsical way of having kind of a witchy garden. And these flowering shrubs, they really come to life at this time of year. So it's a reminder that just because a lot of things are dormant, it doesn't mean everything is. A lot of things are built specifically to flower at this time of year. There are clematis varieties in certain climates that will bloom in the winter time, and they are incredible. The fragrance will just draw you in. Again, when we were in the Dordogne region in France, we found this clematis that was climbing up this old stone wall, and it just covered it in white blooms. And even from far away, sort of the beginning of this park, you could be drawn through the entire park just smelling that clematis. Absolutely incredible. I can't remember the name of it, although I did see it in a magazine, but it was in French. But it is just exquisite. So I highly recommend checking that out. And just really look into things, even certain varieties of plants that maybe you think you can't grow. A lot of the times there will be some that can grow in your zone, but because maybe they're not reliable or they're not very popular, you might not be that familiar with them. So just look it up, maybe test it out, see if you can find a place that you can purchase those, order them online or something, but do a little bit of research in terms of that. You could also go to our local nursery, Equinox Valley Nursery. Fantastic nursery in Vermont, is just so amazing. The folks there are incredible. And if you go there any time of year, there's such fun things to do. So I highly recommend Equinox Valley Nursery. It's tucked in the Equinox Valley and it's just beautiful. They're incredible over there. And you could always just ask them, or ask them to put, your local nursery, ask them if they could order something special for you from their growers. Doesn't hurt to ask, and usually people are so friendly and helpful. Well, this video is getting very long and I could talk about this kind of winter interest ad infinitum, but I just want to sort of remind you that this is about you and what you want to see in your garden. So if you don't want hyperstructure that's going to require a little bit more work, then maybe you just want things that can kind of ramble and meander through the garden, spread themselves. And so you just as a gardener become the editor of it. These are all wonderful plants that you can add, that you can let them do their own thing, and they'll provide beautiful structure throughout the year. And it's just as important what's going on outside as what's going on inside. So wintertime is just a fantastic time to really nurture and care for your houseplants. Houseplants are beautiful. They provide such beautiful interest. This peace lily is blooming and I'm so excited about it. But you can have all kinds of things like palms and ZZ plants, so many tropicals that are just so fun to bring indoors. So I highly recommend that. Also growing little herbs in a windowsill. It's a great time of year to do that as well. So I really hope you found this helpful. Do let me know what your favorite winter interest things are, because we can learn from each other in the comments. Thanks so much for being here. If you want to follow me on Instagram for more of sort of like a virtual diary, you can check me out at It's Anna Fable. It's Anna Fable. So I'll be sharing some more inspiration over there, and I hope to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. Like this video and subscribe if you're not already. It really does help us out. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.